keeping a focus on making sure that we finish the build and we get people connected as efficiently and effectively as possible. That's definitely number one. Number two, rolling out fibre, and rolling out fibre right the way to the home is a fairly intrusive thing from a customer perspective. So continually looking at ways of improving the way that we are connecting people to the fibre network, trying to reduce the amount of customer pain involved in that. We are often digging holes in people's driveways and doing other fairly intrusive things. So doing that in the best way that we can, in a way that is as least disruptive to customers as we can manage, and as frictionless for customers as we can manage, is a very big focus too. And probably somewhere where there's always room for improvement, and every so often I still read a horror story, and we work really hard to reduce the number of those, and we're making some good progress there too. And then number three, as we get further advanced into the build, and we're 70% of the way through UFB1, well into UFB2 planning and rollout, we're starting to turn our minds to what else is it that people are going to be doing with this world-class infrastructure that we're building, spending a lot of money on it. So, trying to make sure that the regulatory framework is settled and that the project can be finished without major disruption, because that's probably a big objective for us at the moment, and the legislation's in the Parliament, and it's very encouraging for us to hear that the Minister is keen to have that progressed and come out the other side of the legislative process.
Chorus has set itself the goal of installation in a day for ultra-fast broadband in people's homes. Have you set a deadline for when you'll achieve that goal?
18 months.
Well, good luck at that, because it's a big challenge.
It is a big challenge.
We'll check with you in 18 months.
You can come back and see how we've gone in 18 months' time.
Right.
I think with process redesign and different ways of doing things, we've got a lot of things in trial at the moment that we are trialling with various of our retail service provider customers and with the service providers. I'm probably going to get killed by my staff for committing to 18 months, but honestly I think we should be able to get there by then. And some of it goes to, originally, you couldn't possibly have done it that way, but as we get further through the build and we look at things like, especially in the smaller communities, turning up and saying, we're putting the communal infrastructure in, but we're going to connect you at the same time. If you're interested, we'll do that. And then all you've got to do is make a phone call to your service provider and you're up and running. Those trials are proving quite successful in a number of places. We're also working with service providers to say, how can we go and get everybody in a multi-dwelling unit, for example, signed up at once, so that we can go and do it all at once instead of we go backwards and forwards. So, and even in terms of the way that we organise the work, we're looking at some design changes so that we can actually get the work done closer to the customer and reduce the rates of failure, so that instead of going twice or three times to a customer, we can just turn up once and get them connected and we're all done. So yes, there's definitely challenges, but we're going after it.
And some challenging finances for you. Just taking the financial guidance that you're offering the markets for the current year, the CapEx could be as high as 820 million.
Yes.
But the EBITDA could be as low as 625 million. So that's a 30% gap between the two. How do you plan to bridge that gap, and to make sure you can keep investing?
So I think we hit our peak investment in FY19, and again I mentioned the legislation and the regulatory framework. That becomes really, really important for us because we need stability and certainty. We're investing for the long term here, we're not investing for next week, so it is a very big capital investment. We need to make sure that we've got that utility style of regulation. We're very happy to be a regulated utility. That's the nature of the business that we're in, and if we've got a long enough time horizon and enough opportunity to manage the transition from the copper world to the fibre world, as long as we drive enough volume and we spend our time and energy thinking about what else people are going to be using the fibre for, the future should be fine.
But will that, bridging that gap over the next couple of years out to 2019, to that peak investment, require more debt or some additional capital injection in some way into the company?
Certainly we expect that we will be spending capital at roughly similar levels until the end of FY19, and then we start to taper off. And we think with our current sort of settings, we should be able to manage that. The only thing that's variable is the number of people who connect. But because that's so important to us strategically, if that means we need to spend more money to get more people connected, we will absolutely do that. And we think we can manage that.
And the additional challenge of keeping people connected rather than having them poached by some of your retail customers who are offering them a different technology, sort of fixed wireless, for example, rather than UFB.
I think the experience says once people get fibre, they never move, because it's a very good experience and infinitely superior than what any of those other technologies can provide. And that's the reason why we think the goal for us is to get as many people onto fibre as we can, because once they've got it, they love it.
You have had some quite high rates of customer attrition that you've managed to cut back over the last quarter. Yep. Can you explain some of the ways that you're able to reverse that or at least reduce that outflow of customers?
Sure. And I should start by saying, to be clear, most of those people who moved to fixed wireless, they were people on the copper network, not people who have moved to fibre. We have very, very low churn on fibre. There's a few things that have gone in our favour. The launch of Netflix in New Zealand, there's now more than 1 million people watching streaming video. That's a pretty hopeless experience on fixed wireless. It's an excellent experience on fibre, and the more people consume that kind of, have that kind of consumption experience, they want the fibre network. I think there's an increasing recognition that fibre technology is the best technology, and so given that it's pretty affordable here in New Zealand, good reasons why you should take it. And in terms of what we've done, we've, as you probably have noticed, hopefully have noticed, run a better broadband campaign, just making sure that people do understand the choices that they've got and why the fixed network is better for the vast majority of people in the vast majority of circumstances. We've also started running more proactive campaigns with our retail partners, with the service providers. And again, they've been quite successful in terms of making sure that customers who are consuming large amounts of data are getting the right service for them. And we would plan to keep on with that type of activity, just making sure consumers are well informed about what choice is going to be right for them.
One of the big challenges for you is you're one step removed from customers because there's the retailers in between. How do you try to overcome that gap?
Look, I think, we have no desire to be a retailer. We're very clear we are operating at the infrastructure layer, and, there's no reason why you can't have a reputation for being a trusted and a reliable brand when you are an open access wholesale operator, and that's how we try to think about it. Certainly, in some cases, it'll be easier to be able to deal directly with the end customers, but it means we have to work very closely in partnership with the other people who are in our part of the market, and that's what we aim to do.
How will Chorus meet a triple challenge in 2022? That's when the UFB rollout is complete, competition from 5G wireless could be here big time, and thirdly, copper will be much diminished in terms of the volume it's used.
That's a big lot of questions. Yes. in there. Look, maybe I'll start with 5G, and I think particularly the way we think about it, and in most jurisdictions in the world, wireless technologies and fixed technologies are seen as complementary to each other, and indeed are seen as technologies that are converging. So I would say, number one, 5G is going to require a huge amount of capital investment, and there's not too many obvious new revenue streams associated with that. So I would say there's quite a strong case for thinking again about shared infrastructure in that world, because when you get to the point of small cells, which is the only way you really get quantum leaps in capacity, you're going to have those every couple of 100 metres. Really, are 3 mobile operators going to do that? Probably doesn't make much sense. So I think there's opportunities to replicate the very successful model in the fixed world, in the 5G world. And, the economics of it are so challenging that it's hard to see how that's going to be done in New Zealand unless there is some kind of shared infrastructure model. Also, you need a lot of fibre to support 5G networks, and we would see ourselves as being well placed to be able to help with the connection of all those small cells back to the network, because by then, as you rightly point out, the build will mostly be finished and we'll have an awful lot of fibre all around New Zealand. In terms of managing the copper network, at the end of all of this process, there will still be a number of customers who won't have much alternative, and for the time being we're continuing to invest in the copper network to give the best service that we can to those customers. And I still think there are some public policy questions about what you do for that small percentage of customers who get left without a fibre service at the end of the build. We got some ideas about that, and I think we're very open to talking to the new minister and the new government about some ways of solving that, because I think nobody in New Zealand wants to see a digital divide. We've done a great job of getting as far as we've gotten, and probably there's just a little bit more work to do to finish that job, to make sure that everybody in New Zealand gets access to the right quality infrastructure wherever they happen to be.
In terms of installation for retail customers, you're entirely dependent on the contractors that you have. To what extent does Chorus set any kind of pay or working conditions or other key performance indicators for those contractors and their staff?
We don't set pay or working conditions, but we definitely contract with those service providers. We have a clear responsibility around health and safety and the environment, to the extent that anything that they're doing falls within that regime. We are absolutely crystal clear. The safety of workers comes first, and nothing should be allowed to compromise that. We do have contractual terms with the companies that we deal with, and that sets the rates for how the work is going to be done. But underneath that, in terms of sort of the individual subcontractors and how they choose to operate, that's a question for them. From a sort of corporate brand and reputation perspective, though, we regard them as an extension of ourselves, whatever the legal arrangements are. So we want everybody who's working for us, everybody who's turning up in a truck to somebody's house, to behave according to the standards that we would expect, to be respectful towards the customers, to understand what's acceptable and what's not. And we work very hard on trying to build those relationships with all of the people in the industry. They're our feet on the street, whatever the legal arrangements might be. So we put a lot of effort and energy into trying to make sure that they do the right thing.
Those contractors are clearly very dependent on a large number of immigrants to be able to ramp up the volume of work. Are there any concerns that with the changes of government, it'll be harder to get the immigrants that you need into the country to help with that work?
I couldn't give you a number about exactly how many immigrants that we have, but certainly there are some. I couldn't tell you exactly how many. We've invested quite heavily, long before my time here at Chorus, in training, and it actually takes a little while for those people to get up to speed. Definitely, I think a few years ago we had challenges with the number of people who had the right skills out there in the field. We're actually reasonably comfortable at the moment that we've got a skilled workforce, and we've got roughly the right order of magnitude of people for the work that we have on hand. So we don't think there's a big challenge for us around availability of skilled workers, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
So you've been in this job of Chief Executive of Chorus for just about 9 months now. What have been some of the biggest surprises to you, both on the upside and the downside?
Happily, mostly pleasant surprises. I will say I've probably become a firmer advocate of the model than I was from the outside looking in. You can see great benefits in the separation model and the focus that you've got in this company, in Chorus, for just really focusing on doing a great job of the build and working hard on the customer experience without being distracted by a whole lot of other things. Probably more generally, I think the business community here, the whole idea of New Zealand Inc., was probably a happy surprise. There's a more cooperative environment here, I think, where business leaders are actually quite concerned to do the right thing by New Zealand, and I found that something I feel very comfortable with, and it's a really lovely part of the environment that probably didn't exist where I came from. In terms of bad things, boy, it rains a lot in Auckland. And it's more humid than I expected, but otherwise it's really a lovely place to live, and I think probably most New Zealanders don't realise how lucky they are. There's a great, strong economy. It's a very lovely place to live. The people have been very welcoming, and it's a well-kept secret in some quarters.